ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Donal Hernan.
I got a clap from Stephen Fry. This has made my year. Welcome everyone to the Hamming Innovation Hall at Nokia Bell Labs. It's great to have you here in person. And hello to everyone that's streaming in from remote sites all over Bell Labs globally. And to all you weird people in the future that will watch this and the post-recording, well, I don't know what to say to you, but hello as well, I suppose. So it's great to have you here. I have two basic jobs to do. It's very simple for me, thankfully. One is a very mundane thing around housekeeping, and the other is I need you as an audience here to help me achieve one of my goals for this year. So the housekeeping thing is that the restrooms are at the front of the building, fire exits are at the front, left and right of the building, and here just off the stage, left and right. And then to help me achieve my goal, I have a goal that I need to be part of one of these lectures where there isn't a single instance of a cell phone causing an interruption. And I've tried everything. I've tried naming and shaming. I've threatened physical abuse. The last lecture, I even said that anyone's phone that goes off, it's direct proof that they are stupid and lacking intellect. And that didn't work, honestly. So I'm going to speak to your better part of your mentality and ask you to take out your phones for just 10 seconds, turn it to silent, turn it to vibrate, turn it to flight mode, or just turn the bloody thing off, please. And trust me, you'll turn it off for an hour, it'll be great, you'll have a great time, and the world will still be spinning on its axis when we come back an hour later. So with that, talking about spinning on one's axis, I'm going to introduce Marcus Weldon as the Chief Technology Officer of Nokia and the President of Bell Labs.
So Donal tried a first to get you to turn off your phones. The first for me is I'm going to say nothing. No, it's not possible. But I am going to say relatively little because there's nothing I can do to compare anything to Stephen Fry. He's more humorous than the average bear. He's a better actor than the average bear. He's a better thinker than the average bear. He's a better writer than the average bear. In fact, he might be the best of all those things across all bears. I might go one step further, across all of Bell Labs. So that's really who we have here with us today. We spent a day with him, had dinner with him last night. It's been just a fabulous time. He is everything you would want him to be, and possibly more. And it's very rare that we get to say that. So it is a true honor and privilege to have Lord Steve. No, I didn't. He's not Lord yet, but. Stephen Fry, I welcome to the stage, and I think you're just going to be wowed. So thank you very much, Steve.
Thank you so much. I do think it would have been nice if Marcus had mentioned my modesty as well. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm so thrilled to be here. I've had a marvellous morning being shown around just some of the extraordinary moonshots and blue sky and remarkable thinking that is going on here. And I just can't tell you how. I feel like basically the closest I can come to is I'm Charlie and Marcus is Willy Wonka. And I suppose that makes you Oompa Loompas, and you're very fine Oompa Loompas too. Now, I'm not going to wear my glasses, actually. I seem to be okay without them, thank goodness. Let me open, at least, by saying that despite a lifetime immersing myself in what I consider the provoking, beguiling, bewitching, and often befuddling joy of technological development, information, and shiny things, I am no computer scientist, no coder, no programmer. Many of you, most of you, if not all of you, who have been kind enough to come along today, will know much more about the technicalities of the subject I'm going to discourse upon. Take this, if you take it at all, as the offering of a curious mind. Curious in both senses of the word, avid for information, and just plain odd. Now, the future has never been bigger business. Every day more stories appear relating to the great confluence, the great convergence, the time that is surely coming when the swelling currents of the streams and tributaries of robotics, bionics, AR, VR, gene editing, nanotechnology, brain-machine interfaces, the Internet of Things, and machine learning break their banks and flow together into one mighty technological flood, a tidal wave which will sweep over the human and natural world and perhaps bring about the singularity, the end of the primacy of humankind, or possibly the end of our existence as biological entities and the beginning of a new transhuman or non-human dominant sapient species upon the earth. The same questions are asked. What will it do to our minds, our social groupings? Is this the end of the workplace, of education, medicine, commerce, and social love, leisure and labor as we've always understood them since the dawn of language? The hinges of Pandora's box are beginning to squeak as the lid rises. Plenty of concerns make the headlines today: trolling, post-truth, fake news, the rise of big data and its ownership of citizenry's every move, preference, spending pattern and propensity. The slavery of the gig economy, the echo chamber and filter bubble that tribalizes and ghettoizes us further and further, the threat of hacking, identity theft, extortion and cyber terrorism, the grooming and recruitment of the young for nefarious ends, bullying, body shaming, and so on and on and on and on. But these, it should be understood, are what Donald Rumsfeld would call the known knowns and the known unknowns. They are all issues that worry us now and of which we are fully cognizant, albeit powerless, it seems, or unwilling to address. Even politicians, cultural commentators, and business people are aware of these issues. But such challenges are as nothing when set beside what's coming down the pike in a very short while indeed. But before I make a total fool of myself by making any rash statements about the future, let me tell two stories from the distant past. They're both well known, but bear repetition. After all, as I think it was Schlegel who said, a historian is a prophet looking backwards. I already hinted at one of the stories I'm going to tell you when I referenced the hinges of Pandora's box. In reality, I should have said Pandora's jar. As a matter of fact, we often call it Pandora's box because no less a figure than one of the heroes of early humanism, Erasmus, mistranslated it from Hesiod. Anyway, Pandora and her jar were all part of Zeus's revenge on the Titan Prometheus and on us. The king of the gods had not forgiven Prometheus for stealing fire from heaven and giving it to mankind. He looked down and saw fires breaking out everywhere. Industry, ceramics, cooking, foundries for art and war. But he saw that man had the divine spark too, the inner creative fire that makes us seek, push, invent, question. Perhaps we can call that the consciousness that we sense is uniquely ours in the animal kingdom. Zeus was to punish Prometheus by chaining him to the Caucasus and sending an eagle to peck out his liver every day. But mankind he punished in a more subtle way. And for once I use the word mankind without fear of being tutted. There were no human women at this point. The god Hephaestus, Vulcan to the Romans, was commanded by Zeus to create the first human female from clay moistened by his spittle. Hephaestus took his wife, Aphrodite, his mother, Hera, his daughter, his aunt Demeter, and his sister Athena as models, and lovingly sculpted a girl of quite marvelous beauty into whom Aphrodite, Venus to the Romans of course, the goddess of love and beauty, then breathed life. The other gods joined together to equip her uniquely for the world. Athena trained her in crafts, science, and arts. Hera endowed her with authority, poise, and self-possession. Apollo taught her skill in music, learning, archery, rhetoric, and reason. Hermes schooled her in the deception and curiosity and cunning arts, and he gave her a name. Since each of the gods had conferred upon her a notable talent or accomplishment, she was to be called the All-Gifted, which in Greek is Pandora. Zeus bestowed one more gift upon this paragon. It was a jar or box filled with, well, he didn't tell her. And down she went to earth, where she was wooed and won by Prometheus' brother, Epimetheus. Well, you know what happened. After weeks of aching curiosity, Pandora waited until she was alone in the house, and she couldn't help herself. Which of us could? She pulled the jar from its hiding place and twisted the lid. Its waxen seal gave way, and she pulled it free. There was a fast fluttering, a furious flapping of wings, and a wild wheeling and whirling in her ears. She cried out in pain and fright, and jumped back as a host of horrifying, leathery, scaly forms flew out of the mouth of the jar, a great cloud of them chattering, screaming, and howling in her ears. With a cry, Pandora summoned up the courage and strength to close the lid and seal the jar back up. But it was too late. Like a cloud of locusts, the shrieking, wailing creatures flew away over the town, over the countryside, and around the world, settling like a pestilence wherever humankind had habitation. And the names of these creatures were hardship, starvation, pain, anarchy, lies, quarrels, disputes, wars, battles, manslaughters and murders, death and disease. All these pains and sorrows were released into the golden age, and illness, violence, deceit, misery, cruelty, lies, and anarchy filled our world, and they would never leave. What Pandora did not know was that when she shut the lid of the jar so hastily, she forever imprisoned inside one last little creature, which was left behind to beat its desperate wings in the box forever. Its name was Elpis, hope. When I first found out about and joined the internet back in the late 1980s, I watched it grow with fascination and excitement. By the time the World Wide Web arrived, I was anxious for my friends to get themselves websites and email addresses. After all, it was fairly pointless being the only person I knew with an email account. I'd been through this before as an early adopter, as a matter of fact, when for 3 years I was the only person I knew with a fax machine. It was like being the only person alive with a tennis racket. Pretty useless. Anyway, I told my friends that this internet, was the greatest gathering of human beings in the history of the planet. As new services came online and Web 2.0 blossomed into the social media services we now know and perhaps rely on, I really believed, that humankind might well be saved, enhanced, perfected by this all-gifted creation. It would spread art, literature, music, culture, philosophy, enlightenment, and knowledge. In its train would come new freedoms, a new understanding between the peoples of the world, a new contract. This was to be our millennium's Pandora, an all-gifted organism that would spread learning, understanding, amity, comity, and peace. I looked at budding projects like Wikipedia, and I saw Voltaire, Diderot, and Thomas Paine's Enlightenment project becoming a reality. I saw art galleries and archives becoming freely available to all. I saw special interest groups able to exchange information and ideas with their fellows across the globe, whether it was coin collecting, a love of a particular style of music, a shared pleasure in gaming, hiking, or cosplay, a rare physical or mental disorder in common. Suddenly, people could contact each other across the world. Free translations, free lectures, tours, user-generated advice on travel, hunting for the best deals and bargains, sharing experience in all fields of human endeavor. Borders, barriers, frontiers, and boundaries would melt and dissolve. An end to tribalism, racism, ignorance, fear. A new dawn for mankind. It was Pandora, all gifted, all good. Twitter, for example. I joined Twitter early on, thinking it a fun, trivial little nonsense that might be worth pursuing, but when it showed how people could connect in real time as they massed in the squares of Tunisia and Egypt, ushering in the Arab Spring, my joy was complete. What tyrant could endure in this new world? How could censorship and propaganda survive when the wisdom and knowledge of crowds was there to shine the light of truth in all the world's darkest places? The new Pandora's suite of accomplishments and capabilities would bring about a paradise on earth, utopia made real. What could possibly go wrong? You're right to laugh at my foolishness. I do myself. When did the lid loosen on the jar? When did I become aware that perhaps it wasn't quite so perfect after all? The odd caterpillar in the salad shouldn't put us off green vegetables, and the occasional fly in the ointment shouldn't put us off applying it. But the beating of the leathery, scaly wings of something worse fluttering from the jar couldn't be ignored, even by so perfectly gullible and cosmically optimistic a fool as me. The lid had been lifted, and evil things flew out. Bullies, monstrously cruel and malicious thieves, extortionists, brigands, pirates, liars, con artists, predators, monsters and trolls. Spite, enmity, meanness of spirit, cruelty of intent, and greed. So much obscene, naked, panting, shuddering greed. Hope was nowhere to be seen. So have I gone from dewy-eyed, dopey and idiot optimist to dead-eyed despondent and despairing pessimist? Well, my second story, from long ago, concerns a great ruler in the East who called together his ministers and greatest sages. I have won the world, he told them. I have all the power and pleasure that anyone can require, but I am not at peace. My mind and fighting spirit are racing, but I have no enemies to defeat. I want some occupation, some pastime, some puzzle that will fulfill my passion for war, strategy, conquest, tactics, and absorb my time. Whosoever invents, designs, confects, or concocts such a system, such a pastime, will be granted any wish. Well, the cleverest and most cunning talents in the empire, the designers, creators, poets, planners, inventors, dreamers, and visionaries worked furiously to come up with some creation, some invention which could satisfy the emperor's ennui and ensure their own future wealth and happiness. And the day came for the emperor to judge their entries. He circled the great hall of his palace, examining each of the offerings submitted for his inspection. Gold, silver, and brass forts and castles of immense mechanical sophistication promised hours of realistic wargame play, enough to satisfy any bored imperial warrior, surely. He passed by each stand like a celebrity chef judging a cookery competition, or a duchess at a flower show, sniffing and tweaking and prodding and testing. Nothing tickled him or worked his saliva glands, until he finally came to a table at which sat an old Persian man who favored him with a wrinkled, snaggle-toothed grin and bade him sit before him and play the game he had invented. It looked very plain next to the great artifices and apparatuses that were created by the others. A wooden board, 2 ranks of light boxwood figures facing across to 2 ranks of identical dark ebony figures. My game is unique, the inventor said in his strange Farsi accent, because there is no luck, just planning, cunning, skill, daring, and imagination. Just like war and just like life, here is the king. In my country of Iran, we call him the Shah. I shall be the black pieces. You must attack my Shah. When he has nowhere to move, you may cry, Shachmat, the king is dead. Checkmate, said the emperor, who was a little deaf. Close enough, said the inventor. He showed the emperor how each chessman was allowed to move, and they played, and the pair of them played and played and played. The emperor had never seen a game like it. Such complexity from such simplicity, such traps, surprises, artful creations and combinations. The other submissions to His Imperial Majesty's competition stood no chance. This new game of Shachmat was declared the winner. You may ask for any reward, cried the delighted emperor. My wants are simple. My family small, the inventor replied, sweeping the few remaining pieces from their last game and showing the empty board. You see my chessboard here, just 8 squares by 8. I would ask only that a single grain of rice be placed for me on the first square, and then 2 on the next, and 4 on the one next to that, then 8, then 16, and so on, until you have come to the last square, adding twice as many grains each time. Ha! Cried the emperor, clapping his hands. For all your cunning, you missed a chance to enrich yourself, old man. You are too easily satisfied. Bring a bag of rice. Within moments, the emperor's grand vizier was pinching out a single grain from a sack and placing it with haughty disdain onto the first square, A1 in modern chess parlance, or Queen's Rook 1. 2 grains he placed on B1, 4 on C1, 8 on D1, 32, 64, and finally 128 grains on H1, the end of the first rank, King's Rook 1. The Grand Vizier was getting a bit bored with such a fiddly undertaking and sent for a pair of tweezers. 128 was rather fiddly, and for A2 on the next rank, you would have to count out twice 128 to fill that square with 256 grains, which was already too much for the small space to contain. Uttering a weary oath at the nuisance of it, he chose instead to place a small stone on the square and heap the grains onto a floor tile. B2 next to it needed 512 grains. The emperor saw that this was going to be a boring procedure and waved a hand and was making to move off when his chief astronomer and mathematician, the most wise and learned sage of the kingdom, stood before him. "Sire," he hissed in agitation, "I have made calculations. When the vizier gets to the halfway point, the end of the fourth row, it will require 2 billion grains of rice just to fill that 32nd square. By the time he is on the second square of the 7th row, over 500 billion grains. By the end of that row, it will be more rice than the world has ever seen. By the last row, more rice than the world could ever see. More than there are stars in the sky. More than there are grains of sand in the desert, mighty one. If you grant his wish, you will bankrupt the empire and the world will be a parched desert." The king tried to do the sums in his head, then looked at the figures the sage had chalked on his slate and thought hard. He slowly saw how vast the numbers became. By this time, the sage had calculated the weight of so much rice. No horses, yaks, or dromedaries could carry so much. Not in 100,000 times 100,000 years. The vexed ruler did now what any powerful leader would do, what you and I would probably do in the same circumstances. He swung his scimitar and sliced off the inventor's head as a lesson to all clever people not to get cute with kings. And so chess was born, and so too the terror and horror of the remorseless playing out of exponential growth was introduced to humanity. The grains on the rice board story has been repeated and refined to demonstrate the havoc such alarming rates of growth can wreak and how tiny, manageable integers can quickly explode into numbers so vast that our earthbound sublunary imaginations cannot hope to deal with them. So much in life seems to be exponential. We are the result of exponential division. One cell becomes 2, 4, 8, then 16, and so on, until an amoeba-like blob can somehow coalesce into the form of a jellyfish, a grizzly bear, an orchid, or Angela Merkel. Exponential progression means that as humans, we go from one cell to the 27 trillion that complete us in just 46 steps. That's all. But if we look backwards, we can see the effect too. We have 2 parents, 4 grandparents, 8 great-grandparents, and so on. It doesn't take many generations before the number of my direct ancestors, i.e. individuals who are all quite as necessary for my existence as my parents, exceeds the number of humans that has ever existed. A few steps further back and the number exceeds the quantity of mammals, and then all eukaryotes and all life and all the grains and atoms that make up the planet. The exponential curves prove that everything in the universe is our ancestor, that we are, as Sagan famously said, star stuff. They prove too that the smallest elemental building blocks can transform themselves into living structures of mind-boggling complexity by no more than small recursive iterations of procedures as simple as binary fission, mitosis and meiosis, and all the other things I've forgotten from school biology. And through the power of that progression, the day would come when an exponential curve would topple the game of chess, just as it caused the loss of its inventor's head. But first things first, from its arrival in our world, the depths and subtleties of the game of chess astonished us. Never mind the quantity of grains of a square. On a square, there are more possible games of chess, it turns out, than there are atoms in the observable universe. 10 to the power of 120 games, as opposed to the universe's feeble 10 to the power of 80 atoms. This estimation is known, as it happens, as a Shannon number, after Claude Shannon himself and his work on these startling numbers, these game tree complexities, as they're known in the field. For chess was long considered the apogee of human intellectual achievement. Chess masters can keep every game they have played in their memories, not to mention the thousands of games played by past geniuses and contemporary rivals. They think forwards many moves to levels of analysis that boggle the imaginations of amateurs. The more you get as a patzer, an amateur, a glimmering sense of what good chess play involves, the more staggered you are by the incredible mental powers of champions. When Boris Spassky was preparing for his famous World Championship match against Bobby Fischer in 1972, he would tune up his reflexes by playing 10 master-strength players simultaneously blindfolded. Easy to see, therefore, why chess became a symbol of the highest achievements of our remarkable brain, combining insight, forward planning, calculation, imagination, intuition, flair, memory, concentration, spatial awareness, resilience, determination, and in its highest flights, creative genius. Mastery of chess meant a complete intelligence, a mathematical intelligence, a strategic intelligence, a tactical intelligence, a visual intelligence, an artistic intelligence. Chess, therefore, became, from the very beginning, the holy grail as far as the creation of an artificial intelligence was concerned. Indeed, a candidate for the world's very first robot was the Mechanical Turk, an 18th century chess-playing automaton that turned out to be a Wizard of Oz fake, a very small person tucked in a cabinet operating levers. But two great geniuses who met here, well, perhaps not exactly here, but at the Bell Labs in 1942, Alan Turing and Claude Shannon, were both interested in the idea of a machine being able to compute chess moves. This idea lodged in academia, technical institutes, and the popular culture. Think Professor Stephen Falcon in the 1993 blockbuster War Games. If mankind could build a machine that was capable of matching or even beating the world's greatest player, well, that would be the breakthrough. It would bring us closer to artificial general intelligence, the move from a box of cunning algorithms to the creations of sapient machines, machines with sense, if not necessarily a full sense of themselves. This would inevitably lead to machine superintelligence, which in itself would bring about that singularity, the moment when everything changes for us, as critical and momentous as the catastrophe of the Permian extinction, when 90% of all life disappeared from the planet, or that first atomic test in New Mexico in 1945. A day as important to our species as the longed-for first contact with an extraterrestrial species, or perhaps even matching the epoch-defining day when someone had the astonishing idea of sandwiching a toasted marshmallow between chocolate-smeared graham wheat crackers and asking for s'more. Such seismic, game-changing breakthroughs come rarely in our history. What brought Alan Turing and Claude Shannon, two of the greatest intellects of their age, or any age, together in the 1940s? Not chess, of course, but war, and the need for the Allies to pool knowledge on developments like cryptanalysis, radar, and the cavity magnetron. Turing, of course, was specifically working on decryptions of German Enigma traffic. Shannon was fast becoming one of the world's greatest authorities on cryptography and artillery fire control systems. More excitingly, and less known to anyone but themselves at the time, the pair of them were independently working out the terms and protocols for what would become known as information theory. But it would probably be fair to say that Alessandro Volta brought them together. He heaped up, you'll remember, discs of metal, zinc and copper, in brine or sulfuric acid, and gave the world its first reliable and consistent electrical pile or battery, named in his honor a voltaic pile. His work caught the eye of Emperor Napoleon Bonaparte, who in 1801 instituted a prize in his name, the Volta Prize for research into electricity. Very far-sighted of Bonaparte. That prize was won in 1880 by my hero for this afternoon, apart from Shannon, who is Alexander Graham Bell, inventor of the telephone, or winner of the patent at least. Bell felt he had personally made enough money from his great invention and ploughed all the prize money into the establishment of research and development laboratories that bear his name to this day. Bell had ludicrous ambitions, as you probably know. He even went so far as to state, "I hope you do not think me immodest when I say that I believe that one day there will be a telephone in every town in America." The remit of these newly instituted Bell Labs was to feed the fruits of their labor into the parent Bell telephone company, Ma Bell, now to be divided in two. Manufacturing the physical equipment, the actual phones, cables, relay switches, and so forth, was Western Electric, who over the decades would become Lucent and Alcatel, and then finish up, and I use the word finish correctly, into Nokia. The second company, which would run the infrastructure and customer end, was the American Telephone and Telegraph Company, better known as AT&T, and no one knows what happened to them. Bell Labs had been founded in a golden age of invention and mechanical engineering, but by the 1940s, when Shannon and Turing met, higher and deeper realms of science and numbers were replacing the down and dirty swarf, sweat, and swill of invention and engineering. The mechanical world seemed to have given up most of its secrets. Materials and compounds were more crucial than ever, but deep expertise in chemistry and a proper understanding of the nuclear and even quantum nature of matter was rapidly to become essential. Bell and his phone, Jacquard and his loom, Volta making his pile, Marconi and the radio, Samuel Morse and the telegraph, George Stephenson and the locomotive, Carl Benz and the combustion engine, Lee de Forest and the vacuum tube, Thomas Edison, Nikola Tesla, these brilliant and extraordinary inventors, innovators, engineers, and discoverers would have understood barely a single word or idea that passed between Turing and Shannon when those two sat together and chatted numbers and their relation to logic, probability, and so-called universal computation. These two individuals were probably the only on the planet who had taken so far the bold idea that information, words, and the flow of data could be expressed and mathematically modeled in Bayesian and Boolean terms, and that these mathematical expressions could be used as the basis for directing a flow of current, such that the current's journey through diversion, resistance, capacitance, rectification, and amplification might allow the storage and manipulation of data and the performance of calculations. Such fancy, rhetorical, theoretical frameworks were all very well, but existing technology could never realize the extraordinary information revolution that these ideas hinted at. Delicate, breakable glass vacuum tubes were unreliable enough when put to dedicated tasks like code breaking and gunnery calculation. The fantastic possibilities raised by Shannon and Turing, well, these surely could never be made real in the lifetime of the century. The inefficiency, the overheating of the tubes, such problems appeared insuperable. The history of Bell Labs and its achievements is well covered in literature and libraries and online, and I'm sure you know it better than I do, but their refinement of vacuum tube technology from 1,000 hours reliable use to 80,000 hours allowed them to create the transcontinental system that realized Bell's mad ambition to get a phone to every town in America, and some. The brilliant but tragic William Shockley's work on the manipulation of current in solid-state materials like copper sulfate and silicon came up with the Nobel Prize-winning semiconductor triode, or transistor. Shockley left New Jersey to establish a business in his hometown of Palo Alto, California, and Silicon Valley was born. 8 of his senior collaborators left him as his behavior, politics, and management style became ever more bizarre. 2 of that traitorous 8, Gordon Moore and Robert Noyce, would set up their Integrated Electronics Company, or Intel, which built on that early semiconductor work, finding ever more cunning ways of layering silicon in wafer-thin P and N-state sandwiches that they called integrated circuits, and which the world welcomed as microchips. In 1965, Gordon Moore first propounded his celebrated, remorseless, and astonishing law. You're all familiar with his declaration that technological advances in chip production would proceed such that the density of integrated circuits would double periodically, somewhere between every 18 months and 2 years. Twice as many transistors in the same space is the way this exponential curve is most commonly described. The power and speed of computing doubling every 20 months, perhaps better expressed as the cost of computing consistently halving every 20 months. It's worth mentioning that Moore stated this not as a law, but as a mixture of prophecy, proposition, and goal, one which so far has been met with pretty astonishing accuracy. How do we picture Moore's law in action? If in the year that Moore first declared it, you had a car that could go at 5 miles per hour, but which doubled its speed at the same rate as Moore's law, it would now be going at 671 million miles per hour. Mars in 5 minutes. Actually, that's not quite true because I came across this analogy in a book published in 2015. So in fact, by now, the car has reached 1.3 billion miles per hour. In other words, it's now Mars and back in 5 minutes. And that speed will double next year. Here's another way of looking at it, one that shows how fast the numbers accelerate out of control, how the slope becomes a wall. The referee places a drop of water in the middle of the pitch in a stadium, like the MetLife here in New Jersey or Wembley in London. And then a minute later, he places 2 drops. Then a minute later, 4 drops. To fill up the stadium would take just 49 minutes. But, as Callum Chase observes in his book, The Economic Singularity, the startling fact is that after 45 minutes, remember it's 49 minutes, it's filled. After 45 minutes, the stadium is only 7% full. If you're top and back, looking down, you might see something happening, a puddle forming far below. 4 minutes later, you've drowned. Whoosh, the curve becomes a wall. Here's yet another way of looking at it, an example closer to Gordon Moore's world. In 1996, the US government's American Strategic Computing Initiative started building the ASCII-Red supercomputer. By 1997, it had achieved its goal of being the first to achieve true teraflop status, that's to say, performing 1 trillion floating point operations per second. For 3 years, it was the most powerful computer on Earth, bar none. Just 5 years after that, the same level of processing power was available to any teenager with a Sony PlayStation 3 in their bedroom. And that was 11 years ago, and nothing has stood still since then. The law has continued to press. Technology is not a noun, it is a verb. My view of the power of the exponential curve, and therefore Moore's law, is that, as Niels Bohr once said of quantum mechanics, if you aren't shocked by it, then you haven't understood it. It doesn't just apply to silicon chips, of course. Light-emitting diodes, LEDs, are subject to an equivalent of Moore's law called Haitz's law. Every year, the cost per lumen falls by a factor of 10, and the amount of light generated per LED package is increased by a factor of 20. The amount of data being mined is exponentially doubling too. And in 1996, irony of ironies, what do you think was swept away by the power of that ineluctable growth but chess? That year, Deep Blue, IBM's dedicated chess machine, defeated Garry Kasparov, probably the greatest player ever to push a pawn. If back in the 1950s or 60s you had told one of the fathers of artificial intelligence or of the information age that the day would come when a human-constructed intelligence would beat the world's best chess player, they might have suggested that this moment would mark some kind of real powerful and potentially terrifying watershed, because chess, as I have said, was always considered the apogee, the acme, the summit of human intelligence. Yet the Deep Blue victory did not elicit the reaction that might have been expected, because Deep Blue cheated. Yeah, its team may not have behaved quite fairly during the tournament, but I mean that Deep Blue cheated in a much more meaningful way. Rather than utilizing an intelligence, Deep Blue's team at IBM realized that by the mid-90s, integrated circuits had become powerful enough to write a program that could analyze 200 million chess positions in a second, could throw itself ferociously into every move and counter-move, and look deep into scenarios that could offer it the best candidate move in every position. It was remorseless and frightening. Kasparov and others described the experience as feeling that an unstoppable wall, a great grim granite wall, was approaching them. They were engulfed by the power of the program. Screw creativity, imagination, insight, understanding, and intelligence. This was brute force calculation, as mindless but effectively destructive as a cyclone or a swarm of locusts. The victory was not artificial intelligence, or indeed intelligence of any kind, just the result of Moore's law. Deep Blue was a single-task calculating machine that proved nothing other, unfortunately, than that chess wasn't, in the end, so difficult a nut to crack. It wasn't so much a triumph for AI as a loss for chess's exceptionalism. Larry Tesler of Xerox PARC, had a rueful but insightful rule named after him. The moment a machine can do it, it's no longer artificial intelligence. The moment Deep Blue defeated Kasparov, chess stopped being a realm for AI. As Noam Chomsky remarked, a computer winning chess is no more surprising than a forklift truck winning a weightlifting competition. As Moore's law rolls on, the humiliation was ground further into humanity's face. Very soon, any home computer could do what Deep Blue did and beat any human alive without raising its circuitry a degree Celsius higher. So the gun sights were set now on the world's greatest exponents of the Chinese board game Go. The complexities of Go, with its 19 by 19 board and identical black and white stones, are so unimaginably, grotesquely huge that Moore's law or no Moore's law, brute force is still decades away from being a solution. Compared to chess's Shannon number of 10 to the power of 120, Go has a game tree complexity of 10 to the power of 360. The observable universe has a mere 10 to the power of 80 atoms, you'll recall, and most people would probably call the universe jolly big. Go presented then a real test for real AI, and forward to take up the challenge came machine learning in the form of Demis Hassabis and his DeepMind AI, latterly acquired by Google, of course. That the plan was to deliver on the promise of the artificial neural nets first posited by the fathers of AI, thinkers and visionaries like Marvin Minsky, Frank Rosenblatt, Ray Kurzweil, and others. In March 2016, way earlier than the date Hassabis and his team had dared suggest, DeepMind's AlphaGo program beat one of the game's top players, Lee Sedol, and then in May of this year, the world champion Keiji fell to AlphaGo, which could now rightly crown itself world champion. For those of us following the course of AI, this really was a turning point. Unlike brute force, machine learning allows a computer to act for itself, more or less unsupervised, able to discover its own heuristics, strategies, and procedures. Given the smallest instructions and the most basic carrot and stick drive to reward itself for wins and mark itself down for losses, reinforcement learning proved itself capable of play that justified, in the view of Go masters, the descriptions beautiful, bold, surprising, creative, imaginative, intrepid, and artistic. Tesla's rule bids us say, yes, but Go is a closed, abstract system. It has no reference to anything outside itself. It's isolated from the mess and noise of the world. Therefore, winning at Go requires no real intelligence. And AlphaGo no more understood Go than Deep Blue understood chess. Well, advocates for deep machine learning could point to IBM Watson's victory over the long-running TV quiz game Jeopardy! There are still those who think someone from IBM was pulling on levers in the tradition of the Mechanical Turk, or Professor Marvel in his tent operating the Wizard of Oz. But for the rest of us, this coup demonstrated not only a computer's expected ability to access, analyze, and reproduce facts at lightning speed, but also a commendable grasp of Jeopardy's perverse and idiosyncratic inverted question and answer format, not to mention the tortuous puns, homophones, rhymes, and other forms of high-level wordplay necessary to understand a question in the first place. Watson, who is a bundle of AIs, of course, not one master brain, was offline when playing the game, but had all of Wikipedia baked in, naturally, plus more than 200 million other pages of information. And this is where it all gets interesting, because the data that AI had to mine in order to play Go were really no more than the millions of games it had played with itself, whereas Jeopardy's AI needed to grind out, sift, winnow, and refine the world's knowledge, such of it that a TV producer might regard as general, at least. But even if Watson needed only 0.025% of the human knowledge in order to be competent at Jeopardy, IBM could fanfare Watson's victory as proof of how efficient a fuel data can be when it comes to powering AI. After all, like Deep Blue, Watson is first and foremost a promotional tool for IBM's sales department. Google Translate, which you must confess you have used, does not understand language at all. It doesn't even have the faintest grip on syntax, semantics, phonemes, or grammar, but has nonetheless dealt the traveller's phrasebook a nearly mortal blow, and we must constantly remind ourselves is not now today what it will be in 6 months, let alone in a decade. So put together brute force, deep machine learning, reinforcement learning, language recognition, universal data mining, and perhaps we can acknowledge that we are starting to get closer to something remarkable. Data, of course, is the gasoline that will fuel the engines of AI, and big data acquisition is increasing, as I have said, exponentially. Even if Moore's law has only a decade or so to go before it reaches physical limits of silicon's capacity, awaiting us are new materials, indium gallium arsenide. I had a look today at Sanjay's lab, titanium trisulfide, and graphene nanotubing, not to mention developments in qubit stabilization that are opening up the possibilities, or maybe I should say probabilities, of quantum computing. All this should convince us that the wall that came at Garry Kasparov, the wall that the exponential gradient so suddenly and devastatingly becomes, that wall is almost upon us. Nothing can stop it. Nothing can stop the usual human nonsense that will result. The first uses will be war and sex, naturally. Armored exoskeletons, obliging cyber companions, unimaginable fantasy scenarios, augmented and virtual realities, blending with reality in such a way as to make a lot of money and cause a lot of ethical headaches. But above all, be prepared for the bullshit, as AI is lazily and inaccurately claimed by every advertising agency and app developer. Companies will make nonsensical claims like, our unique and advanced proprietary AI system will monitor and enhance your sleep, or let our unique AI engine maximize the value of your stock holdings. Yesterday, they would have said our unique and advanced proprietary algorithms, and the day before that, they would have said our unique and advanced proprietary code. But let's face it, they're almost always talking about the most basic software routines. The letters A and I will become degraded and devalued by overuse in every field in which humans work. Coffee machines, light switches, Christmas trees will be marketed as AI proficient or AI savvy or AI enabled. But despite this inevitable opportunistic nonsense, reality will bite. As autonomous driving becomes the rule, not the exception, more blue and white collar jobs are taken over by AI systems. The art market will be fooled by AI paintings one day. Music wholly composed by AI will be found to have made the charts. AI-devised scenarios will be made into movies. They're at least heralding a great rise in Hollywood's quality. All kinds of industrial, social, and governmental systems will go on the AI grid, and once jacked into the matrix, as with the electrical grid and the internet grid, they will never survive off it. Optimists, and I think I count myself as one, assert that repeated mechanical labor, precision calculation, and backbreaking repetitive toil are but recent temporary elements of our primitive phases in agriculture and industry. They're no more natural and inevitable a part of human life than pulling oars on slave ships or picking potatoes for a feudal lord or sending children up chimneys. They say we concede such work gratefully to the machines and take comfort in Moravec's paradox, which states that high-level reasoning, precision repetition, and calculation so difficult for us is easy for machines, while simple motor skills that a 5-year-old human can do without thinking, such as tying up shoelaces, skipping, dancing, or catching a ball, are astoundingly difficult for machines, enough to be considered impossible for quite long into the future. So we can dance, play cricket, or baseball if you must, and skip into a bright tomorrow without tripping over our laces, while the machines stay in school and do all our work for us. The pessimists point to bad actors, hackers, extortionists, terrorists, perverts, and thieves who will inevitably come close to holding the planet hostage by absorbing, hijacking, corrupting, and weaponizing AI systems. What Photoshop can do for the faking of still images can now be done for the moving image. Already, we can place a politician in a brothel and see them licking honey off a prostitute. It's their word against ours that the scene is genuine or confected. And this fact will, through endless false positives, allow politicians actually to go to brothels and lick as much honey as they like of prostitutes, and they'll always be able to dismiss it as fake. I saw this headline in the New York Post just 3 days ago. Hackers could program sex robots to kill. You can expect much more of this kind of clickbait hysteria. If we thought the Pandora's jar that ruined the utopian dream of the internet contained nasty creatures, just wait till AI has been overrun by the malicious, the greedy, the stupid, and the megalomaniacal. I haven't even begun to address the effects of CRISPR-style gene editing, bionic augmentation, the move to transhuman metabiological states of being. The first human to live to 200 is generally agreed probably already to have been born. Anyone in this room who's now half my age, and that's probably most of you, will almost certainly live twice as long as me, if you get my meaning. My nephews and godchildren will probably make it to 120, their children to 200 or beyond. No one really doubts this. We sleepwalked into the internet age, and we're now going to sleepwalk into the age of machine intelligence and biological enhancement. How can we make sense of so much futurology screaming in our ears? Well, since the cognitive revolution that gave us language 5,000 generations ago, humanity has been conducting a kind of quiet lab experiment on itself, in which we've tried to understand who we are, how we work, how we got here, where we might be going. We call the lab experiment philosophy, with its internal departments of logic, epistemology, the study and theory of grounds of knowledge, metaphysics, aesthetics, and ethics. The starting pay for smart graduates in the field of AI being recruited by big corporations is $500,000 a year. That's your entry-level salary. That may annoy some of you. The big corporations and government departments do not, unfortunately, employ philosophers at any salary. And perhaps this is the time to call for a change to that. Ethicists do have some presence in the corporate and medical world especially, but that's more as a hedge against litigation than an investment in understanding. Isn't it fascinating that we are trembling on the brink of creating machine intelligence at exactly the time that we are making and confirming discoveries about our own evolutionary acquired human intelligence that demonstrate to us as never before how contingent, fragile, unconscious, involuntary, and opaque our own natural minds and brains seem to be. Never has our sense of who we are and what makes us seemed less solid. Philosophy, neuroscience, psychology, cognitive studies, and evolutionary psychology have converged over recent decades in the search for a deeper understanding of ourselves. For example, Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky's work on the biases that underlie our judgment and decision-making and the narrativized elements of our memories has shown us how radically and irrevocably unreliable our conscious and unconscious minds truly are. Raul Martinez and others have as definitively proved as could be wished that free will really is an illusion, or at best a paradigm. We can give vehicles autonomies that we don't appear to have. For it is clear that we are not in control of the automobile of ourselves. The self appears to be less a discrete entity than what Daniel Dennett calls a center of narrative gravity. Yuval Noah Harari's books, Sapiens and Homo Deus, confirm for general readers like me how our most cherished thoughts, beliefs, institutions, world pictures, and intellectual structures are myths. We can no longer trust that the old capital letter virtues, justice, virtue, truth, mercy, and so on, have any exogenous meaning or validity. Our sense of human exceptionalism has been dealt numerous body blows of this kind. The empathy and altruism on which we congratulate ourselves turn out to be evolved stratagems that are no less likely to be found in amoebas and vampire bats, who feed each other, nurse each other, and can be witnessed sacrificing themselves for the greater good of the survival of their families and species quite as impressively as we humans. The deontic inner voice, the divine conscience or Kantian moral law we long thought we detected within us, seems to be no different to a congenital instinct or stratagem programmed into us by evolution, just as Asimov's prime directives may soon have to be programmed into robots. But the ironies don't stop there. Just as we have worked out, thanks to Darwin and genetics, how we evolved into what we are without the aid of gods or intelligent designers, We are now in a position confidently to announce that by the end of this century, there will be cognitively skilled entities on the planet that actually are the result of intelligent design. We will be the intelligent designers, the gods, or at least the Prometheus who gives the divine spark to our creations. Daniel Dennett articulated this ontological Möbius strip by observing how a process with no intelligent designer can create intelligent designers who can then design things that permit us to understand how a process with no intelligent designer can create intelligent designers who can then design things. You can unwrap that when you get home. So if, like Prometheus, we're to be punished for this hubris, we can't say we haven't warned ourselves. Greek and other myths warned us, and when we were growing up, Ray Bradbury, George Orwell, Aldous Huxley, Isaac Asimov, Margaret Atwood, Ridley Scott, Anthony Burgess, H.G. Wells, Stanley Kubrick, Kazuo Ishiguro, Philip K. Dick, William Gibson, John Wyndham, James Cameron, the Wachowskis have in their own ways articulately, eloquently, and repeatedly sounded the alarm. So we are being asked to wake up to the excitement and thrill of the creation of autonomous sentient beings at just the time we are realizing how little autonomy we, in fact, have, and how little we truly understand consciousness and cognition at all. There's another irony, or maybe it isn't an irony, but a tragedy. All this is also happening at just the time when mankind seems most notably to be suffering one of its greatest ever droughts in authority, unity, and consensus. Never in our lifetimes have we had less faith, it seems, that there are any responsible adults in charge who can ensure that we get this right. There is no locus of authority, no center of gravity intellectually, socially, or even morally. The compass needle is whizzing round, and there are no lodestones to pull to true moral north or true moral south. Christ on a bike, look at who our current leaders are and ask if there ever could be a more disastrous world in which to unleash such utterly transformative technology. If at the height of our culture wars, we cannot agree that social justice is a desideratum, or on the nature of equality, gender, and identity, for example, how can we possibly address such issues as cyber sex slaves, robot warriors, AI detectives, machine-enabled security, or automated judgment and punishment? The most cherished achievements of the Enlightenment and humanism could well be fatally wounded by statistical and epidemiological real-world and genetic data that fly in the face of our most cherished beliefs, let alone the manipulation of machines by hackers, extremists, and rival governments. So, anyone can outline the dangers and the threats. What's the answer? I'm happy to be able to tell you the answer is no. Do we trust the interested corporations, Alphabet, Amazon, Facebook, Apple, Microsoft? Do we have faith that governments will get there? Do we, as I and others have been pushing for, finally utilize the great resource of world philosophy and ask David Chalmers, Saul Kripke, Judith Butler, Daniel Dennett, Nick Bostrom, Peter Singer, and their like to guide us? You might say that everything's fine. We got this. Oxford University has the Future of Humanity Institute with philosophy's leading thinker in AI, Nick Bostrom, as well as indeed as Gary Kasparov on its research and teaching staff. Elon Musk has founded OpenAI and advises on Boston's Future of Life Institute with Max Tegmark and other heroes of what we might call the movement. Musk has also assisted Berkeley's MIRI, the Machine Intelligence Research Institute, founded by Elisa Yudkowsky. The machine, my alma mater, Cambridge, has the Leverhulme Center for the Future of Intelligence, while Caltech, Stanford, MIT, Princeton, and this storied and magnificent institution at Murray Hill are all doing their bit as far as arming us for the future is concerned. But are they joined up enough with the rest of academia and the wider world? I remember when I was rector of Dundee University in Scotland for 8 years, being astonished that the School of Computing there had such little contact with other departments. It didn't help with networking or scheduling or payrolling or statistical analysis or any notable forms of interdisciplinary research, which struck me as a terrible waste. If I were the principal or chancellor of a big university now, I would instantly commission urgent reports from the head of every single department on the coming impact of AI on their discipline and the likely effect on their graduates leaving for the world of work. I would insist too on everyone reading everyone else's report. I would be happy to close my university until I felt everyone was on board and we were ready. Because, you know, we're living in a floodplain and a great storm is coming. Perhaps the most urgent need might seem counterintuitive. While the specialist bodies and institutions I've mentioned are necessary, we need surely to redouble our efforts to understand who we humans are before we can begin to grapple with the nature of what machines may or may not be. So the arts and humanities strike me as more important than ever. We need to understand our soul, spirit, sense of beauty, sense of humor, empathy, love, jealousy, rage, hate, boredom, surprise, enmity, faith, loyalty, art, dance, inspiration, intellect, and excitement. Because the more machines rise, the more time we will have to be human and fulfill and develop to their uttermost our true natures. One of the reasons I was so happy to be asked to deliver this Shannon Luminaries lecture is that people here, you, whose reputation was built on science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, are so open to looking inward to the human heart. Bell Labs seems, as ever, to get it. While I've offered, of course, no answers that won't have been thought of by most of you here, I hope I can at least add my voice to the public conversation such that decibel by decibel, the amplitude of our sound wave is raised enough to reach the ears of the institutions and organs of power. The decibel, of course, like this great institution, is named after Alexander Graham Bell. Unfortunately, it's a logarithmic unit, so to raise our noise by 1 will take quite a bit of loud shouting, especially when so many of those we are trying to address appear to be deaf. But then again, Alexander Graham Bell always wanted to be remembered not as the inventor of the telephone, but as a pioneer in his original field, as a teacher of the deaf. So let us all undertake to carry on his work now. Sound the bell. I thank you. Thank you very much. Bless you. Thank you. That works. Thank you very much. Thank goodness.
You win the prize for the longest round of applause.
Oh, goodness, that's very kind. Relief, I'm sure. I've just noticed, I did that SoundCloud a few days ago and sent it to your good people. It was just, there's a website called soundcloud.org or something, and you just upload your text to it, and it makes the SoundCloud.
And
I was so pleased that Will was
right in the middle.
right in the middle. I must have used it a lot. I always used to make the terrible joke that while some people are always concerned about whether we are the sum of our genes or of our upbringing, they always forget this issue of human will. I said it's not a question of just of nature and nurture, it's a question of nature, nurture, and Nietzsche. Anyway, will is important.
That was just a fantastic treatise. I'd obviously read the Hay Festival lecture, but you've taken that and amplified it more, which I didn't think was even possible. And lovely references to science and Bell Labs, but it all wove together in just a lovely, lovely narrative. Okay. So the thing that occurs to me, we had Jan LeCun here, obviously one of the younger founders of AI, but obviously invented convolutional neural nets. And we talked to him, and he said the reason he works on neural networks is to understand how he thinks. Yeah. And I wonder whether, in fact, the coincidence you point out these things are happening at the same time is, in fact, there's a group of people, Jan and the like, that actually want to build models, AI models, machine learning models, in order to better understand who we think. And in doing so, maybe that's how we master the machine, because we end up understanding ourselves a little bit more. And so this dilemma you have of how can we possibly control the machine when we don't understand ourselves, perhaps the two are actually
interlinked. I agree with that completely. And I said, that I think one of the most urgent reasons for us to redouble our effort of understanding ourselves is because, of course, we will have more time to be ourselves. And, obviously I haven't addressed all the issues of universal basic incomes and all the other sort of economic and political fallout that might happen from this. But also, it was so interesting to me to read a little about the history of Bell Labs. And you realize this, history has these explosive moments, these really quite a sort of nuclear explosions almost. And it's funny, it's been in the news obviously for pretty grim reasons, but the American Civil War was one such. And one of the reasons, I remember my dear friend, the writer Gore Vidal, always used to say to me, so Stephen, you have to realize it was nothing to do with slavery. Well, it was this to do with slavery. The rest of the world would not trade with America so long as America had a labor force that didn't need to be paid. It was an unfair business, and that's why the North wanted to get rid of slavery so it could trade with the rest of the world. Well, now, whether there's all kinds of complicated truths, but what's so fascinating is that within the shortest possible time after the Civil War, that's when this explosion happened. And you had that, there's this theme that keeps resonating, which is the connection of America, the transcontinental railway line. I love all these things that just keep repeating like a rhythm. The big four from San Francisco, and they put the golden spike in as the two lines met and America was covered. And one of them was Leland Stanford, who gave all his money to form the university that bears his name, Stanford. And of course, when William Shockley went to Palo Alto, there was Stanford University was just becoming big, and Stanford, of course, invented the mouse, and then the whole thing sort of developed from that end. And at the same time, then there was the telegraph, and the Western Union. As you probably know, Pony Express lasted 4 days after they completed the wire between America. It took 110 days for the West to discover the death of President Harding. 110 days. And then the next president was Lincoln's assassination, and the world knew instantly because of the telegraph. And Ezra Cornell, who was president of Western Union, he gave his money to a university as well, Cornell. And so you get this. And here in New Jersey, there's so much. Obviously, Menlo Park, where Edison was, and Princeton, of course, and the Institutes for Advanced Studies there, and the amazing influence of Gödel and people like that on the information theory and mathematics generally. But then also Edison and Tesla and trying to get electricity across America. And how do you do that in the whole AC-DC business and the business of having to rectify the current in the first place, which was necessary for telephones, obviously. So you had to do that. And then Alexander Graham Bell, how do you get the telephone wire across? Because unlike the telegram wire, it takes a lot more. And so there came these tubes, and then I love the fact. And then Marconi did the same thing. Yep. Marconi he did a transcontinental broadcast of radio. So you have all these technologies suddenly arriving, and then of course the motor car as well arrived, and all within the same decade and a bit, really. All these technologies arrived that was to define the 20th century completely, and they all had these ambitions, and of course they were all made of materials that Edison could sit in his laboratory and try different metals for a filament until he hit upon tungsten, and then there was the light bulb. But 30 years after that was really impossible. And what you're doing with gallium arsenide is not something that you could do in an open lab bench with Bunsen burners.
You need a bit of liquid helium and dry vacuum.
Goodness knows what you
But so what I'm fascinated by is, because obviously Ray Kurzweil has had this idea, the singularity, where everything sort of, the exponent goes upon the exponent and it's out of control. Yes. But in fact, in reality, your wall, which is very nicely depicted, often then plateaus.
Yeah.
And so
with animals, of course, and populations, it does, because they exceed the carrying capacity of a particular animal. Do
you think in humankind it plateaus? Because we talked about this last night, which is, in the end, we get to something that we perfect. And in that perfection stage, there are smaller increments.
Yes.
And so we sort of plateau, and then there's a delay before the next phase of disruption. And so we don't actually end up going like this. We end up going in phases that are more manageable. Do you think that seems
to be the case? And
yeah.
I think it's there is a word for this, and I can't remember what it is. It's a word in logic, or it's named after a person, but that it's essentially when you sound a warning, by sounding it, it stops being true. But if you don't sound it, the thing you're warning about will happen. And you know what I mean?
Yes.
So you say, if we don't build traffic lights here, a child is going to die. They build the traffic lights, they say, well, there are no dead children. What are you fussing about? And,
well, that's your clarion bell.
So in a sense, that is the bell.
Yeah.
And it's a shame we can't fit a bell curve into this.
Or even the old bell logo.
Yeah, old bell, exactly. But no, I think you're right. And in a sense, we've had, since the arrival of the iPhone, the smartphone generally, and that sort of. And when
We've had a bit of a plateau.
2007, it was Twitter was, Facebook was really taking off. Twitter was arriving, and since then things have eased out, and they're going to get, I think, we all sense, big again. Particularly when we say goodbye to the smartphone.
Yes, so you're absolutely right. And then, of course, all those cloud-based systems that are going to analyze every piece of data coming from every physical thing and system and physiologically, as you point out.
Or there'll be a big one. There will be just a terrible breakdown of things. I don't know how. We all sort of fear. There have been ransomware attacks that have been pretty disastrous, but maybe there will be a big one that will make us sort of pause and reorder things at a governmental level. I don't know.
So the other part of that I find really fascinating is you point out that aesthetics and cognition and art and beauty have to be part of this equation this time around. Why do you believe that so firmly? Is it's not just a convenience, or it's not just a nice thing to say by an artisan?
Well, I think it's two reasons. It's one because we can look at calculations and what machines can do in terms of calculation, and of course they can come very close to.
As with the AlphaGo experiment.
Yes, and it's a long time ago that experiment. Where did that take place? It's somewhere in Northern California, where they played 3 pieces of music. One was by Bach, another one was by a contemporary Baroque composer, and another one was by a computer, and the majority thought that the other Baroque composer was the computer, and many thought that Bach was the computer, and most thought that the computer was Bach. So, you can fool people, and as I said, there will be headlines, because we love scoffing the art market, in which, a computer-generated piece of art will fool somebody. So we have to be very sure about it make us examine what we really value, what it is we value, and the Moravec paradox is interesting, because we will start to value only things that are particular to us. Like we don't value. I mean, chess is still wonderful between humans, but it doesn't hold its position.
Cachet, exactly.
It doesn't,
yeah.
and I guess Go doesn't either amongst Go players, in the sense that they can see how amazingly a machine can do it, but certain things still will, and comedy and performance, things that make you cry, things that tickle our emotional.
Cause us to emote.
Yeah. And we all used to laugh at it. It was almost a cliche of science fiction that Star Trek TNG Data was always asking Captain Picard what it is to feel. I can't tell you, Data. You have to decide. Make it so. And then he'd be switched off, and he'd turn on his emotion chip, and so on. But as with so much of Star Trek, they were addressing something that is very fundamental. If you think for just a little about a machine, and assuming how will we make machines more? We either decide to make them absolutely machine-like, so that they don't even begin to look like a human thing, rather like that went through the GUI of at Apple. Mm-hmm. They suddenly thought, hang on, we don't want the address book to have fake little rings in it, making it look like a Rolodex. Yeah. Why are we pretending to look as if we belong to the real world? And maybe we will demand of computers that they are cold, sterile, hard things.
This is the idea of making this uncanny valley concept. If you bring them too close to us, we reject them. So keep them in a realm where they're separable but useful.
Yeah, exactly. And we must, I'm sure, start to value things more like our own smell. The real dirt and graininess of us, the quiddity of us, the absolute nature of our humanity will become something infinitely more prized. And my hope is that that will bring us together. Of course, there's always
the gritty, dirty, grainy part of us is actually what...
we will value. We will see as some of the things that we will explore. If machines are busy doing... in Japan about 6 months ago, they fired 60 clerical workers at an insurance office and replaced it with an AI system. So, the white-collar invasion has begun, which people always say as if it's more important than the blue-collar, which is so extraordinarily rude and snobbish, but, don't know why they do that, but I suppose that's because newspaper people are white-collar. So
exactly, so they report over
they feel threatened, yes. So once all the things that are repetitive and boring and we don't need or want to do. After all, even you, scientists, you get the computers to do your big calculations. It's the first use computers were ever put to, was to do your sums for you, so you didn't have to get wrist cramp on the blackboard.
That's how they all got to be here.
Exactly. Exactly. We didn't want, there's so many things we don't want to do. And if you actually make a list of all the things we hate doing, then give that to the machines. And that's what we've done over history, you know, vacuuming and washing up, and so watching television, so we can have a recorder to watch television for us instead of having to do it. So Douglas Adams' observation.
That's very good.
But you know, generally speaking, machines do the stuff we don't want to do, and that, you know, the idea that we're having machines to do things that give us real pleasure and contact and tickle. You know,
We've got this higher level function that is this delight function we talked about.
the hedonic principle is so important.
But we don't get to spend as much time there because we're consumed by the mundane.
Yeah, exactly. And as Harari and many other writers have shown us, really, it's one of those things that's so obvious, you rub your eyes and think, well, why didn't I think of that? There is nothing natural and inevitable about work. It's just nonsense to think that it is. Obviously, we like to mine the riches of the earth, on the surface of the earth, to harvest the bounty of nature, and to feed ourselves, and we do so now on a massive scale.
Excessive scale.
That takes work, but a lot of that work we don't need to do. We don't need, really, we've got agricultural machines and so on, because, as Harari claims, you know, the agricultural revolution
was a mistake.
Was a big mistake. It enslaved people.
Yeah.
Suddenly we were in fee to our liege lords, and we had to work he calculates, I forget what it is, but he basically said hunter-gatherers can be said to work in terms of actually hunting and actually gathering perhaps 3 hours of every day, and not necessarily every day at all. The rest, they're walking, moving, making camp. You know, they don't obviously have villages and settlements, and they are so healthy, and they seem, you know, a lot more cheerful. The few that are left on the planet.
On the cave paintings, they had smiley faces.
Yeah, exactly. Whereas the peasants just constantly laboring in the field to bring up food that doesn't even belong to them because of the unpleasant kings and so on. So, and then the Industrial Revolution magnified that to a terrible degree.
And it's been a series of mistakes ever since.
You could argue in terms of our work, and that may be, and it's a blip in human history that we've had that. And so we can just say, well, actually, those days are over. We don't have to. And if we decide that we don't have to work, and if Moore's law and the developments and things you're doing, and with robotics and everything else, really do coalesce in the way that we're thinking they might, then there can be a very exciting and extraordinary time for human beings. But, you know, I would suggest that the poetry and understanding and so on are a large part of it. Otherwise, we will go around again like one of those Star Trek planets that's apparently living in a golden age, where you have boys and girls with blonde curls skipping around and actually all being a bit empty-headed, you know.
So it's a lovely idea. Well, I like the Star Trek thing because I think if you think about where Star Trek predicted the future would be, we go off exploring again. And one thing that Harari says is when when expansion occurs generally in human existence, it's on the premise that we don't understand everything, and we go off and find new knowledge. And so the Star Trek was new frontiers in space. Whether it's space or not, I guess your cognitive aesthetic thing is, and scientific, we'll go off and discover new things with the extra time we've created, and that will create the next phase of existence.
Absolutely.
I mean, that would be...
And another thing Star Trek got fantastically right, obviously venting tachyon beams, a big one, but it was... Nietzsche, whom I mentioned, or Nietzsche, as he's called in America, he wrote that book about the birth of tragedy, and he mentioned how Greek tragedy and Greek art and so on expressed so perfectly the two elements of humanity, the Apollonian, he called them, and the Dionysian, i.e. Dionysus, the god of feast and revelry and fury and foam and fierceness and excess and appetite and lust. And the Apollonian, which was harmony and beauty and rhetoric and speech and logic and understanding. And he understood, Nietzsche's point was the Greeks had come from a tribal, bloodlust, feuding existence of, from Ionia and across, and they'd settled, and they had somehow, we still don't understand how, become this remarkable civilization, but they still contained that Dionysian side, that and on top of it, they laid the beauty of their harmony and their logic and their understanding and their scientific view. And that the tragedies play out the tension between these two. And we can never get rid of them. And Star Trek does exactly the same. The original Star Trek has on the one side someone who is all Apollonian logic in the form of Spock. And in the form of McCoy, they have someone who's all, damn you, Spock, you're a green-blooded monster. and in the middle, you have the man who is constantly trying to be the perfect human, who is a mix mix of both.
Yeah.
He has the emotional side and chides Spock for not having it, but he also chides Bones for being too kind of... And not only that, but they go to planets where there's usually a mistake. One of the planets is either savage and needs a touch of logic and order, or it's all logic and order.
That's
right. It needs some humanity, and it needs some... And of course, these are the things we now sort of examine, because we look at a machine. Now, we're not going to gender machines, I assume. And maybe there will be a big push to gender machines in one form or another, and you'll have cisgendered machines and you'll have fluid gender machines. I don't know if that's a very good idea, aside from the sexual robotic side of it, which is a whole other area.
Sure, that's a different trade.
But if you don't gender them, nor do you... I mean, if you burn into them anything approaching a moral sense, that's very difficult because we're not agreed on a moral sense. You know, we can agree on language. If I say bottle, we more or less understand, all of you, what I mean by bottle. But if I say freedom, every one of us will have a different sense of it. Trump has a completely different sense of freedom to the one that I understand. And, you know, it's true of a lot of very important words that mean so much to us. Justice, right, virtue. These are not things we can agree upon. And so who is to program any kind of and if it merely goes into, if it dives into the data lake and learns to swim, which is essentially what machine learning is just diving in and learning to swim, it may pick up some very unpleasant sewage from the data lake. It almost certainly will.
It will, as have some chatbots have demonstrated.
Absolutely.
That they replicate the sewage.
Yes, precisely.
Because it propagates.
Exactly does.
It grows things.
Exactly.
So I could go on forever, but it's actually your turn. So the audience gets to ask one question. No, we'll do a couple of questions. And then a few of you have the golden ticket back to your Willy Wonka
Are they
reference.
the ones with the shirts?
Where are the golden tickets? They're down here because they get to come and say hi to you afterwards.
Oh.
Yeah, the rest we're going to dismiss and corral somewhere. But anyway, so questions.
Oh, there's a lady there.
Yes.
Thank you, Stephen, for a very fascinating talk and discussion. We have watched your shows, and all the family, we are fans of your shows. So first of all, I mean, actually 2 questions come to my mind. One is the literary work by Asimov and his iRobot and his laws of robotics.
Yeah.
So do you think that, as we have seen the technology advance in the past 60 years since Asimov wrote his books, that we need these kinds of laws to govern how robots or machines should work, and what do you think of that? And second is on AI. So as a comedian and an actor, would you say that if a machine can wholeheartedly laugh at your jokes or your wit, that would be the epitome of AI?
That's
There's the new test.
That's a good Turing test, isn't it?
The Fry test.
It's a wonderful thought. Well, firstly, on the Isaac Asimov and the 3 laws of robotics, which are first that a robot must not kill a human ever. Second, that a robot must always obey a human, except where it contravenes the first. And the third one is it must look after itself. It must defend itself, except, again, where 1 and 2 are broken. And it's brilliantly, I mean, distilled. What a great constitutional lawyer Asimov would have made. I think what's interesting, and I think they are very wise and sensible, and there's no question, especially when you look at the possibility of warrior bots. You know, we're already living in a drone era that we would never have believed 20 years ago. It just would have been, again, science fiction. And as Arthur C. Clarke said, you know, everything that you can't explain in technology is magic until you explain it. It has the function of magic, and it appears to be magic. And science fiction has been a wonderful, you know, petri dish in which these various sort of cultures and futures have been grown, and we've examined them, and it's amazing how impressive they are. One thing Asimov, I don't think, predicted was that there's quite a strong move. So if any of you have children, what are you going to ask, you know, suppose what are you going to suggest they study at university? And how much will AI be across the various disciplines? And law is obviously going to be very interesting. First, there's a lot of legal work can be done by intelligent machines. But also, there's been a great sort of move that there should be a constitution for robots, that robots' rights must be respected. It sounds absurd, but you know, that's again, we're wanting to imprint a human sense of what is morally decent and right onto a robot, and we're already sort of privileging it with a slight sense of of life, you know, there have been many interesting, and Peter
We're
Singer...
anthropomorphizing
yes,
like we always do.
exactly.
Pets
Peter
and
Singer's written very interestingly about whether a chimpanzee has human rights, because it is a human. It's just not a Homo sapiens.
Yeah.
But it is, it's in a sense, it's a primate. It's, the word human is, anyway, lawyers look into that. So that's sort of very much one side of it. And so...
It's the new Turing test.
The new Turing
test.
comedy is, comedy really is one of those things. Horror films, pornography, and comedy, and I suppose a very sad romance, are capable of causing us to make noises and physical responses that actually change our bodies, our body temperatures, just by being exposed to them. A good joke, you can't have it. You go, ha, like that. You actually make a noise. Similarly with a fright, ha, like that, you make a noise. And that's a very extraordinary reflex, and it's deeply human, and you can't have time to stop and think about it. It is absolutely, it just happens, And I suppose that is probably as good a test as you could ever have. You remember Liza, or the sort of early therapist that you would have, a sort of intelligent therapist on computers. I mean, it's going all the way back to 1979. You could get it on an ordinary, sort of very early computer, and you just say, "I'm not feeling very well." I'm sorry to hear you're not feeling well. It was quite convincing. It wouldn't pass a Turing test, but it certainly couldn't laugh at you. You could actually trap it by saying, "I've got this joke. Why is a chair?" And it would go, "Ha ha, that is very good. I've got your number."
I like that idea of vestigial things in the cerebellum maybe that are so guttural and instinctive.
Yeah.
Those are the real tests,
Yes,
I think.
deep limbic things.
Deep limbic things that you can't. I think the other one I'm always reminded of about someone pointed out recently about VR experiences. The reason why you vomit when it's out of sync or the latency isn't correct is because there's only one human disorientation that's historic, and that's poison. So if you think about it, the only thing that we would have protected for 20,000 years ago that would have disoriented us would have been magic mushrooms, poison.
So therefore you
must vomit, and so that's the one thing that we still have that is vertigo disorientation. We have a vomit reflex. It seems inappropriate, but it actually does its job. It stops you from doing the thing, and so we've never replaced it. But it's to your point that set of things is the thing that will test whether you're human or not.
It is
the encoded things.
Yeah. I mean, of course, the interesting thing is what it will do to. I mean, religions, of course, have had over some period of our history have had primacy in telling us, much about our destiny and where we come from and who made us and so on. And how they will respond to this coming wave, because I suspect they're probably not that prepared for it.
Not so happy, probably.
No, I don't think they will be happy about it. But again, I mean, the history of religion over the years has been that it's a bit like that's not AI, the Tesla law about the moment a machine can do it, it's not AI. And religion has said God did everything, and then we showed, well, he didn't actually do that. But okay, he did everything else. Well, not that bit. And science has taken bigger and bigger nibbles out and left religion very little. But although I'm not a believer, I don't want to waste my time being rude and unkind to people who are devout and of pious faith who don't mess with the rest of the world and get on with their lives. That's absolutely fine, but it will be an interesting challenge for them.
It absolutely will be.
And people like Harari, for example, is essentially, functionally a non-religious Buddhist. And there's that chap who just wrote that book, Why Buddhism is True. I don't know if you've seen that big yellow book that came out recently. And so there's a sort of move towards, rather like in the 70s.
Contemplative stuff.
Yes, exactly, taking the best bits of Buddhist philosophy, Eastern philosophy, if you like, but without it necessarily making it a theocentric kind of study.
I think you're right. I think that's probably where we end up, which is not a bad thing.
No.
Another question. Okay, there you go.
Oh, there we are.
Oh, right behind you, Barbie.
Run.
The other behind. Yeah.
There you are.
Stephen, thank you very much. Wonderful, wonderful speech. I'm so glad that I got a chance to hear you.
Thank you.
What you bring up as a question for me is what you were mentioning about Harari, who talked about that our move from hunter-gatherers to people who farm and so forth, that gave us some progress that allowed us to think. James Burke talked about it in his book, where that movement, the Egyptians and culture and civilization, even though we became slaves to the field, it then allowed art and other things to be happening in science and technology, and humans advanced as a result. And if we're on this next stage where it looks like we're going to have another breakthrough in leisure, where we're not going to need to work as much and we're going to give this to machines, how do you see it doing something to allow us to actually provide economically for all the humans on the planet? Food, shelter, the things we've been very unsuccessful lately as our population grows. I don't envision capitalism accomplishing it. And I don't know where we go from there. If any, hopefully my question is crystallizing what I'm asking you.
No, I
if there's
understand,
some thoughts you have, how this technological change, because I was also reading some of Marcus's book about our future X10 thing, where if we produce these massive changes and we don't need to work, if I don't need to work, how am I going to eat?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
And a good sycophancy on reading Marcus's book as well.
Yeah, I thought it was well done, didn't it? And there, no money changed hands either.
No, you can. These are really important and interesting questions. The first, I suppose you'd say, is leisure. Leisure is as new a word as this idea of mankind having to work all the time. It would be a nonsensical word to a hunter-gatherer or people from earlier cultures, because life and work and things were sort of continuous. There was a continuum, if you like, of those, and you didn't distinguish between them. And that would be a good thing to go back to. So we wouldn't even think that life is life. You don't. There's a great film called Let the People Sing, which. Alistair Sim is a music conductor, and the nasty nasty company, coal company, closes down the town's concert hall, and the capitalist in his wing collar says, "What the people do in their spare time is their own affair," and Alistair Sim says, "Gentlemen, gentlemen, gentlemen, there's no such thing as time and spare time. There's only time." And that is, the idea of spare time is an insult to the human spirit. And if we can, the further we move away from that, the best. But the point remains, the move to the agricultural revolution, you could see the whole move is to cheapen calories. And we've cheapened calories amazingly. There's hard labor, but we fill ourselves. Look at my tummy, this is inconceivable to someone, a Kalahari Bushman, whatever, to have a belly like mine. And they get their calories and spend their calories, on that sort of balance that most animals do. In fact, and that's how we as animals always used to. And we somehow decided we could store calories in the most incredible way, but by farming, as we know, and so on. And now we get to this point where machines are going to be doing so much, but there'll still be billions of people, and what is it now, 7, 8 billion, the population of the planet is just getting up to 9 or something, isn't it? Well, there's Bill Gates, who obviously knows a lot these days about the developed world as well as everything else. He's suggested, which is a very good idea, a tax on robotics and AI, which sounds weird, but you're actually taxing them as if they were workers, so that the money that they make from the work they do, it doesn't all just go to the owner of the robot and the owner of the company's patents on the AI, but is spread to provide what is known as the UBI, which is rather nicely the Latin for where, ubi. It's the universal basic income, this idea that, yes, capitalism red in tooth and claw is probably never going to work for the majority of the population here, but some sort of planned economy that is what used to be called a mixed economy, as it were, which is slightly planned, but not so socialistic as to make everybody's blood run cold in America, and to that seems to be the most sensible thing. And obviously, it takes a lot of heads being banged together. And this is the problem of living at a time when tribalism and nativism seems to be on the rise, when it should be the reverse. We should be uniting to address this problem, as we should be uniting to address climate change. These are things that need us to put aside the petty and absurd differences between us and work on this. So I don't know when a politician will rise with the guts to say this and the strength to do it. But, you know, you need each country to have someone a bit like Justin Trudeau, who has a glimmer of understanding and seems to be personable and smart enough at the moment. All politicians disappoint in the end, of course. But
There's another Fry rule we could ever say.
absolutely. Yes. Well, he was just somebody wrote all politics ends in failure.
Oh, that's true.
Yeah,
By definition.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, so we do need that, and of course we can get it. It just takes us to cry for it loudly, and it needs those of us who are communicators to get it into the conversation more and more and more, so that this is looked at. And this is again why I want to go back to academia, because I think, as I say, if the economics department of a university was looking into both, of course, you're looking into what you can promise your students when they graduate and to push them into the world of work, what you can project will be there for them to do, so you prepare them properly. But also you're trying to work as universities do, and this laboratory does, is you're trying to give the world information that is useful, and technology and understanding that is useful. And economists have pretty much disgraced themselves with their obsession with algorithms and using them for making a fortune in markets and so on. Maybe it's time economists went back a bit, and they are going back to sort of slightly more Keynesian principles. But it is, as I say, you just need to get together the heads of universities, which a friend of mine once said, what's the collective noun for heads of universities? It's a lack of principles.
So I'm going to ask a question related to that. So we're now in a world where the money has piled up in the pockets of a few.
Yes.
And that few have become deterministic of the successful move towards this future. You could argue there were monopolies in the past. There were, before that, probably gentlemen scientists.
That is another rhythm that went to the railways, of course, and to Rockefeller. The Standard Oil was broken up.
And now we're back in one of those rhythms.
Bell managed to avoid that embarrassment of an antitrust.
Of course.
Yeah.
But you'll say, actually, some of them, and maybe your point is that some of the pioneering happens under those circumstances.
Yes, it does.
Because you've got those individuals who come together and are driven and have the assets to progress. So you're optimistic then, where the money currently lies might be the fuel that gives us the next wave of innovation. But is it a moral compass that's needed in that?
I mean, it is. Obviously, I mean, the Google and Amazon and Facebook in particular are harvesting data at the most astounding rate, which is making them vast sums of money, but is also banking this data for making even more money. As data, as we know, is the gasoline of the new new technology, and we're very fortunate. A man I didn't have much respect for in the 1980s, Bill Gates, because I thought Windows was so clunky and ugly and unpleasant and was holding back the computing. But I think what he and Warren Buffett, and that goes back to another great titan, a vicious man who had a monopoly, who with Pierpont Morgan created US Steel, and that was Andrew Carnegie, but who then went back to Scotland and spent a year,
building a golf course.
Building a golf course in Dumfries, but also thinking, and he came back and said, anyone like me who dies with money is a failure. And he gave it, he founded the Carnegie Libraries and Museums and Carnegie Mellons and the Carnegie Hall and so on. And this became, an interesting thing. And Warren Buffett then repeated it and told his friend Bill Gates, you've got to do like me. You've got to give all your money away. There's no reason for you to have all this money. It can change the world. And this is where, again, there is a, like we had a few years ago, the new atheists, which I was sometimes bundled in with. We now have the new optimists, Steven Pinker and people like that, who are pointing out that never has the world been, never have more women been educated. And not just more, but proportional to the population of the world. Things are getting better. The Malala influence has been enormous, and many others. But the halo from her, obviously, is the one we think of. But also, education and health outcomes are getting better and better and better in the third world. It's still, of course, you need to keep your eye on the ball, but things are improving, and the example of Bill Gates and Warren Buffett, I hope, will force other people of that nature to realize that this enormous amount of money they have can do really exciting things. And in the end, people like that, whether it's Peter Thiel or whatever, who may not approve of these people in all their, their political direction, but it's sort of irrelevant. The great thing is you can always guarantee they are vain. They want to see their name on a building and a university. They
And
want to
in perpetuity,
in
so they'll do the
perpetuity.
larger
Absolutely
investments. Yeah,
right.
that's an interesting
Yeah.
one. Vanity
Yeah.
drives good behavior.
Yep, it's absolutely.
When you're wealthy enough.
From Alphabet to Zuckerberg.
Oh, that's very good too. I hope someone's writing these down. These are tweetable for sure. Okay, we'll do one more, and then the lucky golden ticket holders, the Oompa Loompas with the golden ticket. But get to come up and spend time, and then we'll have to wrap up. So, last one.
Coming up on stage to
Stephen.
attack me. Yes.
What are your thoughts about the war on science, and what is the best weapon we have to win it as a rational people?
It's such a good question. It is immensely dispiriting. The number of times people have said to me, science doesn't know everything, as if that's a meaningful remark. As if that means anything is therefore sayable. Well, science doesn't know everything. Oh, I see. Well, in that case,
throw everything out.
In that case, yes. In that case, there are angels just over there. Why? Stephen Jay Gould, I remember he had this rather he was a slightly odd figure, a great paleontologist, and he wrote many interesting books on genetics and evolution and things. But he had this idea he called NOMA, non-overlapping magisterium, which he suggested that science get on with scientific things and the non-overlapping things could get on with their things. But actually, there is nothing that doesn't overlap with science. Science is it's a human quest. It's not a special sandboxed, sterilized, hedged off place where certain kinds of genetically disposed people go, though obviously there are, looking at you, a lot of Professor Frinks in the room, and it's fair enough. But no, I mean, it's so beautiful and wonderful and extraordinary what science gives us. It's so incredible, the power of observation and testing and verification and the excited move forward. And, every scientist repeats it time and time. Science is an expression of the limits of what we don't know. Not knowing things is what excites scientists. Isn't this brilliant? We don't know. We don't know what's going to happen. We don't know how this process works. We don't know why this works. We don't know what's going to happen when I put this in one end and what's going to come out the other. We have ideas and we have frameworks, and obviously there is verifiable stuff. I mean, it's these lights are burning; they haven't stopped, and there's a lot of science behind them. You look at Faraday, and I think partly for me, because of my love is telling stories, listening to stories, reading novels, writing books, drama, and so on. And I think it is a very natural human way to understand ideas by being told them in a story. And I think I personally, if I was a billionaire, I would have a science channel which was not like the ones we have, but which was which figured the lives of these remarkable people and told the story of Faraday and Maxwell and Thomson and all these extraordinary people, and Einstein, and how they did what they did, not in a over romantic way, but in a way that kind of opened it up to everybody, because it's very, very difficult to understand why people resist science until you see that it's really very easy, and that is because they don't understand it. They simply don't understand it. I don't understand millionth of the things you all do every day. It's beyond, if I looked at one of your whiteboards, I would just have a headache, and you would be very kind, and you would say, oh, no, it's quite simple, it's this, and then I would get lost very, very fast. But I can grasp some of the ideas, and I can see what grows out of it. And I suppose we have, in Britain, we had Richard Dawkins was the professor of the furtherance of the understanding of science at Oxford, and that was a very good move. Unfortunately, for many, it caused some people to see science, therefore, through Richard's eyes. He's actually a decent, lovely, charming, funny man, but he is always portrayed as somehow shrill and unkind and without a soul or a spirit.
The whole selfish genie thing.
Yeah, which is such a misrepresentation of him, but that's unfortunately how things go. Carl Sagan, deGrasse Tyson here, and there are, and Phil Nye, is it Phil Nye? Bill Nye, the science guy. They're all trying to beat the drum, and they're all trying to remind people of how beautiful science is, and how the scientific principle, the idea, is so magnificent and open to all. I guess I can't give an answer as to how you attack it. There have been mistakes on the part of philosophy and logical positivism and scientism in the past has suggested that the world is known. But the great thing about science and mathematics is it's constantly telling you that nothing is solved. You know, there was a period towards the end of the 19th century when everyone thought mathematics was solved, didn't they? And then, you know, Hilbert's problems arrived, and Bertrand Russell's paradox, and Gödel, and incompleteness, and suddenly everything was exciting again, because science doesn't like solving things and saying that's done, that's solved. It's actually more exciting when you can say, look, suddenly everything's up for grabs, everything's exciting again. And I guess...
Part of the problem in that narrative, I think, is that you have to be confident enough to, because your point about others will jump in and say, well, clearly science hasn't got the answer.
they'll fill the space.
And so it felt that if you create a space that is empty, say we don't understand, others put their ideas in there, and there's a sense that that causes more difficulty in some ways, because now nature abhors a vacuum of knowledge, in goes all other perspectives.
It's kind of amusing that, given that science has shown over the last 100 years how empty the universe is,
right.
how empty this table is.
Right.
The gaps between the atoms are just so immeasurably vast. Well, not immeasurably, obviously, but
Quite measurably, but vast. But I love the idea that what we lack, and I think this gets back to the cognitive aesthetic, we need better storytellers about what science is.
I think that's...
And then I think the willingness for others to fill the empty container will be less because the narrative over here is so interesting.
Absolutely.
Right? I think
and I think one thing that I just realized when I was having this wonderful tour this morning is I realized that how wrong the phrase machine learning is, because it's actually human learning. We're asking machines to learn the way children learn to speak languages. We're asking them to dive in at the deep end and just through exposure to data
copy a baby.
To the rules of Jeopardy or the rules of Go or the rules of any particular system, to learn them and repeat them. And actually, it's also wonderful because there should be a reciprocity there. I think humans should start to learn like that even more than they do. So maybe the future is that we teach humans to learn science in the way we teach machines to learn humanity, and that actually we throw people in more excited, we change the way science is taught. Obviously the fundamentals of mathematics are never going to go away. That's the language in which most science is expressed. But there is still so much.
You're absolutely right, because of course you teach a machine, if you weren't teaching it the formulae, the formalism, by examples. And you would say, here's the narrative, you need to tell me the answer. But that's exactly how you could teach a child rather than focusing on the formulae. Because in the end, the formulae we never use, right, on a daily basis, or a machine can compute for you. As long as you know the input and the output.
Yes.
And then a machine contains the formulae that map those two. We can experiment like that.
Yes.
I mean, I think that's a lovely way to think about it. The symbiosis of man and machine inventing the future. We have to say thank you to that you have a little person. No, there is a little person we have to give you.
Oh.
You have to take the little person home with you.
A cyber doll.
That's right.
Wow.
It doesn't have some of the degrees of freedom you might want, but here it is. Huh? You get a statue.
Oh,
and it is Shannon-esque. There you go.
Wow.
It's quite
Thank
heavy.
you.
You've won the World Cup.
Oh, it's glorious.
And you see Shannon unicycle.
Yes.
Information theory goes around the loop.
It's magnificent. Thank you so much.
So we shake your hand. Thank you for a
Marcus.
wonderful
Thank
time.
you, everybody. Thank you all so much. Bless you. Thank you.
So you get to sit here.
Oh, I sit here now, don't I?
And you're going to hold court.
Of course.
So thanks, everyone. And by the way, no one's ever stayed that long. Normally the doors open and the floods, people leave. But so, thank you all. And Ellen, over to you, and then I'll see you back over the other side.
You bet, Marcus. Thank you so much.